Live chair.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's Place Scrutiny meeting on the 16th of November 2023. We've got quite a chewy meeting tonight, I think, which should be interesting. But let's start off with the top of the agenda with substitutes nominated and apologies for absence. Do we have any, please?
Yes, we do, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Halsworth and Clark, and Councillor Veitch is substituting for Councillor Clark.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Members' interests, to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or other interest they may have in relation to the items included on this agenda, which can be either brought up now or as the moment arises where it becomes relevant. Okay, that said, just quickly see you all. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, hellfire. Excuse me, just 1 second. I'm just having a minor moment here. That's not like it. Apologies. Just a little bit of a technical burp there. Admission on the public. Well, we're on YouTube and we're live. So, with regard to the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of October, hopefully everyone's had a chance to have a look at that, and we can agree that it's a correct record that, as and when the opportunity arises, that I can then put my signature to. Any comments arising from those minutes? I can't see anybody. Just as I'm reminded, we'll do the normal routine, please, of using the hand-raising icon, which will bring you to my top left-hand corner so I can see who wishes to speak, and roughly in the order in which case roughly in the order in which they'll be able to make their point or ask their questions.
Hi, Chair. Just before we move on, can I have a proposer and seconder for the minutes, please? And
yeah, thank you. All right. Anybody? Yes, I can see Councillor Foster to as the first one, and then Councillor Kimber for the second. All those in favour?
Thank you.
Any against? No, and no further comments on that. So that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. And have we received any deputations?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Thank you. Right, so on to the first substantive piece of the evening then, the update on the refresh of the Inclusive Economy Strategy and Visitor Economy Strategy, which will be presented, by the look of it, the Director of Regeneration Strategy, so that'll be Sheila O'Neill. So this is something that we already have, and it's effectively an update that we're looking at. Presumably that's over to you, Sheila.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee and colleagues. We've got a number of people here with us this evening, but Councillor Courtney is going to do the introduction to this item, if that's okay. If I hand over to her now.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and good evening to you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Regan. Hi, everyone. Just a very brief introduction from me. So obviously, as Councillor Dickinson has said, we do currently have an inclusive economy strategy and a visitor economy strategy. These were developed in 2018 and 2029 respectively, and run until next year, 2024. So both are being refreshed and due to be launched in spring 2024. So some of the emerging themes from the inclusive economy strategy are creating economic opportunities for young people, strengthening the social economy, growing the green economy, local distinctiveness and Calderdale as a destination, supporting rural businesses and improving public transports. Those are all really important things to have an economy that includes everyone. Those are some of the emerging themes from that strategy, as you'll have seen. And then from the visitor economy strategy, which is sort of, goes in tandem, really. Some of the emerging themes from that are focus on better information sharing between partnerships, enhancing wayfinding around Calderdale, an inclusive and accessible destination. And we're working with some really good partners on that. Working with regional partners, which is the West Yorkshire LVET, which
Elvet.
is which is the I've gone completely blank on the acronym. Help me out.
The Local Visitor Economy Partnership.
That's it, the Local Visitor Economy Partnership. Sorry, that's embarrassing. And also Greater Manchester, which obviously, if you go to the west of the borough, it's nearer to Greater Manchester than anywhere else. Also accessible destinations, working with regional we've said that, working with regional partners. Sorry, I've just sort of said that bit already. Sorry. Shouldn't be getting flustered over acronyms, but there we go. So the refreshed strategies will enable us to respond to the national and to the local economic context, which I'm sure everyone will agree has changed significantly since 2018, and also to confirm our economic priorities in Calderdale. So why we're here today, this is an opportunity for scrutiny for you guys to provide some input into the strategies. It's intended that the final versions will be taken to Cabinet for approval in March 2024. So this is really, this is a good opportunity for you all you've all hopefully read through the strategies. And if you've got any comments, I will hand over now to who's doing it, Sian, because I think we've got someone here we've got Nicola here from New Local. So I'll let Sian introduce her.
Hello, everybody. Hello, councillors. Thank you, Chair. So I'm sorry, my camera's in a very strange position today. I've just been trying to work it out, but so I feel like I'm sinking slightly into Gadding's Dam for those of you that can recognise it. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Sian Rogers, and I'm the lead for inclusive economy in the voluntary sector, and I'm leading the work on the inclusive economy refresh. And I also support our inclusive economy board, which Councillor Courtney chairs, has started chairing the last this year since she's been in her new role. I'm going to do myself and Diana are going to do a very, very short set of slides just to give you a bit of an overview and intro, which just really summarises the things that were in the report, just to kind of pull out a few themes. But we've also invited New Local along, who are a national organisation who are working with us on the inclusive economy strategy refresh and working with the other partners and colleagues in the council on the visitor economy and how that links with the visitor economy and some other work we're doing on employment and skills as well. They want to use this as an opportunity to get your input into that strategy refresh. So we're hoping that we can spend about 10 minutes, no more, giving you a few slides to talk that through, myself and Diana, and then open it up for New Local to ask you some questions and get some input. So I hope that's okay with you, Chair. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent plan.
Thank you. So the only potential thing is just sharing my presentation. So let's hope that this will now work as well. So bear with me. So hopefully you can see that screen soon.
So far, so good.
And I'll turn that into a presentation as well, which would be good, wouldn't it? Please behave. Yes. Hurrah. I think that's working. Is that working? Can you see that as a presentation, as a set of slides?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Let's roll. Let's see what happens.
It's showing it, Sian, in the mode where you can see the next slide up, but we can see the slides quite clearly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Okay, so just like I said, a few slides, just kind of pulling out the few key points. So just a little bit about what an inclusive economy is. I'm sure you're all comfortable with this and familiar with it. It is set out in the report, but it's just to kind of remind people that what we're trying to do with our economic strategy, and this is our economic strategy for Calderdale, it's the strategy that links to our West Yorkshire economic strategy. It's a really key document for us as an organisation and as a place. We've really clearly set out in the previous iteration of it that it is an inclusive economy strategy. We want to use it as a way that really helps not just grow the economy, but also reduce inequality and build a kind of more sustainable future in terms of the work that we do to support our economy. And that is something that we're committed to continuing in the refresh. The existing inclusive economy strategy was focused around 6 key objectives. They're set out there just to kind of remind people, and I think they're broadly still good objectives. There's a lot of feedback about these feeling right, but it's about the focus in the future. And in the report, there is a bit of an overview of, I think we came to Scrutiny previously earlier in the year in July, and we gave a bit more of an overview of those priorities and also what we've done in the last few years since the strategy has been in place to deliver those. So that's in there as part of your pack if you need to ask any questions about that, and more than happy to do that at the end of the session. So we've had some feedback already in terms of what the existing strategy and what we need to do with the new strategy. So as I said before, there was a broad consensus that the strategy still feels relevant, but there are some expectations about what we need to do, what we want to see in the new one. So for example, we want to have a more clearer focus on what change we want to make as partners, the council, but working with others, so business, the voluntary and community sector, college, other skills partners, other providers of support, people like Together Housing, so a range of organisations across Calderdale. We want to have a really clear high-level analysis of the Calderdale economy, and New Local are helping us work on that. We want to have a really good understanding about how the relationship between how our health is really has a big impact on our wealth, and so being well and being not being in ill health is a really important factor in terms of how we do and our ability to play a role in the economy and have a good job. We want to make more of and the most of our regional national opportunities. That's a big thing for us generally, isn't it, in terms of our regional work? But we really want to put the inclusive into our inclusive economy strategy. So a greater focus on social value, how we support young people, how we support people who are facing barriers to work, doing more to support this idea of community wealth building. So spreading wealth around and having community having more of a say in assets and how they taking a role in regenerating their places. We want to build on what's already in place, so really clearly linking to other stuff and not duplicating that, linking to the refresh of the vision, making sure it's joined up with the health and wellbeing strategy and loads of other things that we've got in place like anti-poverty work, and obviously the key one which we're talking about here, which is the visitor economy strategy as well. So it makes sense to join them up. And we've got to have an emphasis, finally, yes, inclusive, but also on growth and innovation, a real can-do place for business. So New Local have been doing some work. They've spoken to the Inclusive Economy Board. They've spoken to other partners. They're in a process now of engaging with partners across the borough, and this session is part of that. And they've got some emerging themes that are coming out of those engagement exercises. They're included in the report, but just to kind of give you a sense of those, and I think Nicola might say a bit more about those in a minute. So young people, social economy, green economy, rural business, the importance of being able to get to jobs and opportunities. And I think this is where I hand over to Diana, because they've really pulled out this thing about Calderdale as a distinctive destination. So Diana, I'll turn onto your slides now, and if you tell me when you want me to flick onto the next slide.
Thank you, Sian. Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to do a bit of an overview of the visitor economy strategy, so where we are now and the next steps. So the current strategy focuses on 3 objectives: developing the brand within Yorkshire, growing the sector, and acknowledging that culture is vital to economic growth and local pride. So the new visitor economy strategy will be launched in 2024, and consultation with key stakeholders has taken place over the last 2 months. Next slide, please, Sian. So we've done some engagement. We've had some workshops around the borough. We've engaged with key stakeholders. We've done a session with the Calderdale Tourism Board, and we've also joined our consultants with the Inclusive Economy Board, and also, as Sian was saying earlier in the presentation, the visitor economy strategy will very much link into the inclusive economy strategy and the business and skills framework. Next slide, please, Sian. So from consultation, various strengths, challenges and opportunities were discussed. So as you can see here, we've got a lot of strengths in Calderdale, standout attractions, places like the Peace Hall and Hebden Bridge. We've got a lot of diversity, and these were common themes that came out of the consultation workshops. People talked about the film and screen presence, obviously all the great filming that's been happening over the last few years. People felt there's a real sense of place as well, and belonging in Calderdale in certain areas. Connectivity was a real strength. Obviously, our links to Manchester, Leeds, and also London. Again, there were discussions around how diverse, tolerant and welcoming the place is, and it's a really engaged place, and there's a lot of people that love Calderdale and want to get involved in things that we're doing when they're volunteering. Next slide, please, Sharon. So challenges, yes. Calderdale. A lot of people were discussing about Calderdale, the brand Calderdale, what it means to people, and that it's not really that well known. So that we know that there's some work to do around that brand and how we promote that further. There's obviously a challenge at the moment with the retail offer. We know we've got a lot of independent businesses that are starting up around the borough. We're looking to help and promote those where we can, but we do need to realise that there's obviously challenges on the high street as well. We've got lack of quality hotel accommodation. That was something that was prevalent in conversations, and people spoke about wayfinding and how it's not the easiest to get around the borough. Not particularly get around the borough, but know how to get around the borough. So I think we need to do some work on how we can point people to certain destinations within the borough. Transport was a big issue, obviously train travel and the reliability of trains. Lack of parking, especially in rural areas, and then resource as well. So some obvious ones there. And then opportunities. Next slide, thank you. Calderdale, obviously, next year is going to be a really good opportunity for Calderdale to position itself as a cultural destination. We're doing a lot of work across West Yorkshire to try and promote that, as well as how we're leading to the Bradford City of Culture 2025. Filming and screen tourism again, we know that brings a lot of economic benefit to Calderdale, so we are working hard to promote that. Ongoing regeneration, so the investment that's happening around the borough, the future high street funds, town funds, and all the work that's going on with that. Itinerary development around particular themes, so music, heritage, family, the great events that we've got going on in the Peace Hall, and then the local visitor economy partnership, work that we're doing at West Yorkshire level. Thanks. Next slide, please, Sharon. So our emerging priorities that came out of the consultation were work around the West Yorkshire partnership. So how do we develop that work? How do we drive that forward over the next few years? Looking at how we can develop the public realm and wayfinding around the borough, more quality hotel accommodation, looking at how we can promote a more inclusive and accessible destination and become more sustainable. And a big topic of conversation was around information sharing, and it wasn't necessarily to visitors. It was more around how we share information between partners, so attractions, food and drink businesses. How do we make sure that all of our partners know what's going on around the borough, so they can become ambassadors for Visit Calderdale as well, and then spreading and selling the benefits. So I just wanted to give you I know we've mentioned LVEP, Local Visitor Economy Partnership, quite a lot. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, was just to give you a quick update that we've actually submitted an application to become a local visitor economy partnership with the other 4 local authorities in West Yorkshire, and that was successful earlier this year, I say summer. The first governance board meeting was held in October, which went really well. That's actually chaired by the Mayor of the Combined Authority, Tracy Brabham, so it's great to have that its coverage at West Yorkshire level. We've got a partnership agreement that will be signed soon that will outline what our roles and responsibilities are between each of the local authorities. We've got a growth strategy that we're working on, and we're just agreeing some potential funding from WICA at the moment. And then the next thing that we're working on is the destination management plan, and that actually, it's come at a really good time because our visitor economy strategy will lead into that destination management plan. So it should all align, hopefully, and there'll be key themes that we are looking to deliver within that destination management plan. And the three themes, just very quickly, and then I think we'll come to an end. It's just to increase awareness and appeal of the brand, develop products and places, so itineraries, things like that, and manage our visitor economy effectively. Next slide, please, Jan. And finally, this is just to give you an idea of the timelines that we're working to. Like Sian said earlier in the presentation, we are trying to align the strategies. We are trying to make sure that the themes that run through them are consistent. So the timelines are quite similar, and we're hoping to launch the visitor economy strategy at the same time around March, April next year. And that's it from me. If anybody's got any feedback, I think we're going to new local next for discussion.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed for that. I think if it's all right, before we get into introducing new local, if any members have any questions or points to make, please. Does anyone have anything that they wish to have a look at? It would seem not, but I do. No, wait a second. Councillor Foster. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I was just thinking about what you were saying about new, sort of good quality hotel accommodation in the area. There have been various proposals for various buildings, particularly in Halifax, that I'm aware of, that could potentially be used for hotel accommodation, but haven't ever seemed to have got off the ground. There's one, I think it's Crown Street, just down the road from the Women's Centre. That building was earmarked for a hotel years ago, and I don't think anything's ever happened with that. Do we have any updates on sort of previous proposals and whether anybody might be interested in progressing those, or what's happening with any of them anywhere? And I appreciate that's a bit of a long shot and you probably won't have the answers, but it would be useful to know if that is, sort of, if we do need better hotel accommodation. So, so if there's any sort of information on that, so we're not totally starting from scratch.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Foster. Sheila looks like she's got her hands up for this one.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Foster. I don't have a good answer, I'm afraid. I think the issue is around demand year-round to sustain that kind of offer, and hotel operators have very strict kind of criteria about investment, but I think it is a major issue for us, and it's feedback we get regularly. So I think what we want to do is look at soft market testing, looking at some of the operators, seeing if we can match up some of the opportunities. But in order to have a viable offer, you've got to have year-round occupation, whether that's business and leisure mixed. And I think that's the challenge we've got at the moment. And one of the things that Diana and the Destination Management Plan looks at, how we can get people to extend their journeys so that hotel accommodation offer has more longevity throughout the year. So I think it is an area where we know that there's an issue, but it really does depend on market response. So it's not one where we can really step in. I do know of examples where local authorities have underwritten hotel operators. There's an example in Stockton-on-Tees at the Hampton by Hilton, which was led by the council, but it's a very high risk investment and you've got no guarantees of returns. So it's something we're looking at, and we will try and work with the sector to see what we can do to stimulate investment.
Yes, thank you. And as a supplement to that, for example, I think, is it the George Hotel opposite the train station, which closed down after the pandemic? Whether that could be investigated to be restored again. But following up on what you were saying with regard to that, I'm wondering if there's any kind of scope to promote Halifax not only as a visitor destination, but also as a business hub that would bring businesses into, or, I'm getting a bit over ambitious here, thinking about Harrogate as a conference town, but But I suppose, yeah, I guess what I'm talking about really is broadening the appeal of Calderdale just beyond tourism as well, which might need a bit of head scratching. But so yeah, Sarah, Councillor Courtney, sorry.
Sarah's completely fine. Yeah, and we are seeing inward investment actually. I mean, there are companies relocating, and for, one sort of quite small example is, although it's really exciting, is the British Urban Film Foundation. They are they've been based in Shoreditch, I think, for the last 18 years. They make sort of very sort of they support. They have a film festival, and they really support grassroots filmmaking. They're sort of quite a big deal, and they had their recent awards at Dean Clough, and they're actually relocating to Dean Clough, and that's hugely exciting. And I think it's part of Tracy Brabin's plan, I think, across West Yorkshire, is about increasing sort of like entertainment industry, film and TV industry, and with Channel 4 based in Leeds, and with like BBC based in Salford, Halifax and Calderdale, sort of, and also obviously all the filming that we've had. Calderdale's right in the middle of this sort of like quite big sort of quite a lot of exciting stuff that's going on around film and television. So I think, I mean, that's just one sort of example, but there is starting to be, I think, a bit more inward investment, and that's something that we're definitely trying to promote as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because hotels aren't just stayed in by visitors, tourists, they're stayed in by visiting business people as well. So yeah, I think that it is a good point.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Courtney. Yeah, for myself, the destination management plan, that page, I'm sorry, it didn't say anything to me in terms of what you were trying to say. In terms of destination, do you mean Calderdale as a whole? Do you mean specific parts of that? The places of interest that are to be visited? And when you say management of that, can we just dig down into that a little bit more for a few minutes?
Yeah, happy to. So the destination management plan is something that we're doing at a West Yorkshire level, and that's part of the local visitor economy partnership criteria that alluded to in the presentation. So it's essentially a strategic document that we will use to drive forward the local visitor economy partnership. So that will be between the 5 local authorities across West Yorkshire: Wakefield, Bradford, Leeds, Kirklees, and obviously Calderdale. So that will outline some key objectives. So like I said, it focuses on the 3 themes: the increasing awareness and appeal of the brand. So that's the West Yorkshire brand. So really this work, it was just to give you an overview of what we're trying to do at West Yorkshire level. And then the other 2 themes are around developing products and places. So that could be things like bookable product, like looking at itineraries and how we get people moving around the region. So focusing on particular themes like we said about food and drink, music themes, but there's also been talk of a potential visitor pass as well, and how that might attract more people into the sub-region, and then how we look at managing our visitor economy effectively. So that's the strategy that will outline those 3 themes, and then under those 3 themes is obviously an action plan on how we will deliver those. And we actually did have a workshop this afternoon with key partners to discuss how we might do that going forward. So that's the destination management plan at West Yorkshire level, and then the visitor economy strategy will then feed into that, Calderdale's visitor economy strategy.
Right, I see. Okay, so this is high-level stuff that will filter down into more concrete local policies over time.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Okie dokie. So what sort of outcome measures are we going to be considering in terms of things like, there's some broad ones like visitor numbers and what have you, but how do we know that these strategies are going to be working?
So we've actually got a growth plan that will sit side by side with the destination management plan, and that will look at how we will deliver some of the key themes that are set out in the action plan. So the key performance indicators are to be confirmed, but we have got key performance indicators in Calderdale that we work towards. We have a key performance indicator which is around the economic value of tourism, which we measure year on year, and we also have a key performance indicator on the business growth as well, direct businesses that are directly impacted by tourism, and we measure that as well. So that gives us an idea. So, for instance, the value of tourism currently sits around 400 million to Calderdale.
Right, that's quite impressive. Thank you very much. I've got two hands up. Sian first, and then Kate Nicholas.
So I was going to answer the question about how do we know whether or not this inclusive economy strategy is making a difference, I guess. So answering the same question that Diana just answered in relation to the visitor economy strategy. I think, so one of the questions that we've got New Local here to work with us on is really defining what outcomes we want to see from the strategy. So that's part of the discussion we want them to have with you. So what's really important for us to see in terms of our strategy going forward. But it is around the overall growth of the economy, but it is also about it's about how many people are being paid well. It's about how much money do we keep locally in our economy, how many people we get into skills and the right sort of skills. So it's those sort of high level outcomes that we want to see in our economic strategy overall. But key to that is that we also want to get some input from partners and yourselves about what's important, what we think is important from our economic strategy. So that's why the refresh of the strategy and the work we've asked New Local to do is partly about trying to get into where could that be, what should that look like, and what's important to us as a place. So I hope that tees that up, but with the discussion with them as well. So we're trying to get out of you as councillors, what do you want to see from our economy going forward?
Right. Okay. So, in terms of, for example, measuring the impact of that on inequalities, which one of the
absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Okay. What sort of metrics would you be considering for that sort of thing? Unemployment rates or?
Absolutely. We already do measure unemployment rates very closely within as part of our economic data, but it's about really kind of homing in on what are the real key things for us as a place.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I think at this point it's a good opportunity to bring in. I'm sorry about this. Is it New Look?
New Local.
My apologies. Sorry.
That's all right.
New Local. Was that Nicola? Who's yes. Good evening. Welcome. I'm hoping I'm not coming across as too hostile. Yes. Yeah, let's hear it. What have you got from this?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and hello everyone. Great to be here this evening. Just to let you know, I'm joined by a colleague, Julia Slate, who's also here, and will be taking us through the next bit of discussion. You've seen the outline of the work so far, and Sian's outline sort of where we're looking to get to with it. We would say we're still in the early processes of capturing stakeholder views, exploring what people want from this work, and reflecting some of those early findings back to you. So really welcome this opportunity to get some of your input to that, and to help to steer and shape and inform us about where we can kind of go next with anything that's missing that you want us to explore, or any sort of further developments that we can look at around those sort of emerging areas of priority. But picking up first of all on, I think, where Sian started in her initial sort of introductory slides, and then that last little bit of discussion, we're really, really keen that we support you through this work to really think about the difference that will be made in the next 5 years if your new, refreshed, inclusive economy strategy is successful. And to do that, therefore, one of the key questions that we're asking throughout is, well, what would that success look like? What is the outcome or the outcomes that you're really trying to capture? And so we're going to ask a really difficult question of you to begin with, and just sort of say, okay, if you were looking back, but you're 5 years ahead and you're looking back, and this strategy has been successful, and you're just looking at sort of one piece of data, for example, that would show you the outcome that had changed, that you go, great, we've made a difference in Calderdale in relation to an inclusive economy. My first question is, what would that be? What might that piece of data be? And it's not as simple as that. So don't get me wrong, we're not boiling it down to be totally simple in a very complex landscape, but really trying to get at the heart of things that you care about. That's going to be really important for us to think then about, well, how do we get there in terms of the actions that we need to start planning into this sort of strategic approach. So I'm just going to leave that, and I'd love some sort of initial contributions and thoughts and discussions around what is that one piece of data that will really show that something substantive has changed in terms of being an inclusive economy 5 years down the line.
Right, I thank you very much indeed for that challenge, and I'll hit straight back for a boundary. I think with things like metrics on youth unemployment and also participation of ethnic minorities in a broader and more diverse economy as well. So yeah, for example, I was just thinking about with regard to the visitor economy. What do we have as an offer for Asian folks? You know, they're not an insignificant part of our population in Calderdale. Just as one example, years ago, I used to live in Leeds, and it was on more than one occasion I went to the melas that were held in Roundhay Park, and what a real celebration they were, not just of Asian culture, but of people coming together. You know, what sort of strategies might we have as a borough to encourage inward tourism that would celebrate our diversity, rather than, because a lot of it's pretty Caucasian, gigs at Peace Hall, the Misery TV telly trail around Salisbury and Hebden Bridge from Happy Valley, ironically, and of course I'm not knocking these things. These are great, big, powerful things which are great for us. But also Shibden Hall and Park, but it's pretty white. I think we need to celebrate our diversity as well, and I'm a great one for allowing talent to thrive. So I don't want to see pools of talent going wasted. That's what I'm looking for. So yeah, rant over for the time being. Councillor Foster.
Thank you. I would like to see that travel by public transport has doubled in the next 5 years. And actually not just numbers of people on public transport doubling, but numbers of buses and on bus routes doubling, and the numbers of bus routes doubling, because we've got far too many communities that are completely cut off from any bus service. It is utterly preposterous that you cannot get from Holywell Green to West Vale to go to the doctors by bus. There's countless other examples of that. And it is really, really important, if we're to be an inclusive economy, that we don't make everybody rely on their own private transport. And in addition to that, I would love to see places like the Ryburn Valley Greenway actually functioning, rather than still mired in not only mud, but paperwork and various hoops to jump through before they can actually get it going. Because not only do we need public transport to be much, much better, but we need alternative forms of transport, cycling, walking, all of those need to be right up there with an ambition to get people out of their cars. And we need to look at the whole thing holistically. Cars down by 50%, buses, other forms of transport up by 100%, please. So if you can fix that, that'd be marvellous. Thank you.
Brilliant. Absolutely love it. It was so sweet as well in terms of naming the outcomes with statistics too. So thank you. And really great introductory kind of contribution as well. Thank you, Chair, about that sort of diversity and that real sort of inclusive kind of approach alongside what the transport enables. So brilliant. Anybody else want to come in either to augment points or to bring in something different?
We're looking like being met with a wall of silence at the moment, so I'm presuming that means we've got a fairly bunch of happy bunners. That said, I mean, I do want to say that the general broad thrust, as I was reading and listening to the presentation this evening, there's a lot there to love in terms of what we're trying to achieve. In terms of, as I say, ticking the right boxes that are important to me about allowing talent to thrive. So yeah, if we can actually bed that in, then yeah, fantastic. I think that's great stuff. I do want to come up with another couple of points, more for clarification, but I tell you what, rather than me droning on, I'd like to bring in a couple more, please. Councillor Atkinson, then Councillor Patient.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mine's more about how the sort of report and strategy is put together, just to ensure we're going where the facts take us and not sort of pre-assuming what these areas are that need improving. So basically, just can we follow the facts and find out where the real areas are rather than letting not ideology as such, but following the right path. I think of following the right path and facts. I'll rephrase that, Chair. I just got a bit jumbled there. It's more, I mean, when we're looking into things like this, we don't want to start off with a point of these the areas we're looking for. We need to go out and find the areas rather than having pre ideas before the report and building the community and the strategy. I don't know if you understand what I mean. It makes sense in my head, Chair, but I'll try it one more time. It's basically a diversity of opinions and ideas around getting the strategy right.
Right. Yes, I understand. Yeah, the thrust of what you're trying to get at. Yeah.
I'd like me to just briefly respond on that point, Chair.
Thank you.
Just as I think it's a very important point, Councillor Atkinson, and just as a point of reassurance, I guess. I think in terms of the process of developing the work, we are engaging with a number of different sort of stakeholders, listening to those different voices, encouraging people to take a step back to see what is it that they see, what is it that they experience, what are the needs, what are the opportunities. Things change over the last 5 years, and the last 5 years in particular, but also sort of triangulating all of that sort of ideas-based contribution with the data and the review of the data analysis and what that's telling us as well. And it's actually the bringing together of those things that will give us confidence to say, actually, this is the sort of direction to head in. So hopefully we've got that balance of activities right, if you like, and then obviously the ability for that to be challenged at key points in the process as well. So I think it's a very important point.
Thank you. Another metric for me actually would be a vibrant high street, but that's a big ask. Right. There were a couple of points really, and it's more for clarification and definition. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes. Really, I don't want to go too deeply down this. First of all, and it's a question for anybody in terms of defining things like what is so. Oh, sorry, Scott, you wanted to come in. My apologies.
No, that's fine, Chair, and don't be sorry. I appreciate I'm not officially a member of this group, but I just wanted to do my usual boring people and mentioning of the fact that we have a just recently adopted climate action plan that would be very beneficial for people to plug into, so to speak, especially on Councillor Foster's. I've no idea if you can hear me because my screen's paused.
Oh, we're all good. Right.
Especially on Councillor Foster's points around traffic reduction and transport and active travel modes, a really key document for partners, not just the council, to look at to help develop, to really work with the inclusive economy strategy and to help develop that in terms of the green economy, making spaces and places across the borough more appealing for tourism and for people that live there. So it'd be remiss of me not to mention it, Chair, hence why I just did.
Right, wonderful. Yes, absolutely. Yes, important point to make. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Patient. I just wanted to come back just looking for a couple of definitions, and I think they tie in together. How would we define social value as a construct? And similarly to do with that, what does community wealth building look like? Is this I've got a couple of ideas, but I want to see if those ideas match up with a working definition. Thank you, Kate.
No problem. I'll pick up the first around social value, and then I'll pass to Sean and also Nicola, because obviously one of the things that New Local brings to the piece of work that we're undertaking around the strategy is that emphasis on community wealth building, albeit balanced against some wider economic goals. So I really dislike the phrase social value. I really struggle with it as a term, but I really embrace it as a concept. And very simply, when I think about social value, for me, it means making the most of our resources. So channeling what we do to make sure it has an impact on those outcomes that we're looking for and that we're talking about here. So if we're spending on building a school, for example, we think about how can that lever in apprenticeships, how can it lever in local employment opportunities. So it's kind of like getting a bigger bang for your buck is where I go when I think about social value, and channeling that impact into the things that we've already identified as important, whether that's support for local business, whether it's increased employment, increased skills opportunities for people. So I tend to simplify it right down because I struggle with it as a term, but I think that in essence that's its focus. We've got some strong work underway at the moment in our major projects team, looking at how we do exactly that. So how do we make sure that when we're investing in some of our infrastructure, we make those opportunities for apprenticeships, we make those opportunities for employment. So we've got some good practice and see it as a key part, kind of one of the component parts of our inclusive economy approach, because it is about using resources that we've already got to better effect.
Yes, thank you.
I'll pass to Sean and to Nicola on community wealth building, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Just before we do, yes, it's kind of ties in with the Preston model as well, I guess, to a certain extent, which I can buy that definitely. As a broad principle, definitely. Sorry about that. Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, so I mean, my team already, that's part of our work program anyways, to do some of the work on social value. So looking at how do we spend more of our money locally, either in contracts or when we commission services, but also in big projects. So how do we get extra bang for our buck, as Kate says? So that's one of the things that we're doing and have been doing for the last few years, kind of working across the council. But I think the link with the community wealth building is really important. So it's also about how do we work to make sure that we're getting more activity going on in communities, which enables them to reach their own aspirations, I guess, when we're doing regeneration projects. So not just parachuting things in, but we're working with local communities in a way which helps them realise what they want for their places. And I think that's the really important way of flipping some of the economic regeneration stuff that we do. We've got to bring the investment in to make our borough brilliant. We've also got to work with our communities to make sure that there's wealth in those communities, whether that's through helping regenerate that community through a school rebuilding, or it's about making sure that there's some local shops that we support. So it's about how do we work with communities to make sure that places are regenerated rather than just doing two. So I think that's it in an essence. But a good example of that might be things like some of the community asset transfers we've done. So working to make sure that we bring a building back into use or better use by working with the community to do that, and that being a building which is then feels owned by the community that it's there for. So that's a really good practical example of community wealth building. I hope that answers. I think I mean, it's very much some of the stuff that New Local is beginning to tease out, some of the work that we're already talking about, stuff we've already done that we're proud of, but things we might want to build on or think about doing in a different way.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'm just thinking of work being done, for example, in my own wards on the Field Lane estate, and the real difficulty is getting community engagement. That is a real challenge. So how we address that's a story for a whole other day, I'm sure of it. But it does provide huge problems, which in order to bring people along with you. So yeah, I do understand. I think, Councillor Foster, you get to have the final word on this particular matter for the evening. Thank you.
It was just to come back on Sean's mention of community asset transfers. There's two in Sulby Bridge, that one very recent, Foundry Street Community Centre, and Fire and Water which has been took about 7 years to get the keys off the council, but we're going ahead great guns now, and it's a really excellent way of bringing back into use buildings that are no longer used by the council or have been sort of, I mean, with Foundry Street, it was earmarked for sale, and councillors said, hang on a minute, that's a really important building to this community. And we were really pleased that actually the Foundry Street Community Centre group got together and have done an extremely impressive job of getting together all the documents they needed, getting a really excellent bid into place, and they've now got the keys and it's full steam ahead, and it's brilliant to see, and it can really, really work. I know some community asset transfers have struggled, but I think those two in particular, appreciating that Foundry Street is in early stages, but they are proving that it's a good thing, and it can be a really successful thing. So yeah, more of them, I think, is the key, but with the right support and the right group of people behind them to run them in the first place.
Yeah, quite so. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Right. Last shout for any comments, questions? No. I think in that case, that will conclude this particular module for this evening. I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance and their input. Thank you very much indeed to our visitors, Nicola and Julia. I really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing how that unfolds. There's a lot to get that we can get on board with there, I think. Bringing everyone along as best as we can. Yeah, definitely. Right. Moving on to the.
Thank you.
Yes, next item on the agenda, which is about the biodiversity net gain. I want to acknowledge Councillor Brundell for bringing this to our attention, and to thank her for that input. So in terms of the presentation of the report, I believe that would come to Richard Seaman. Good evening and welcome, and welcome to guests in this regard. Is it over to you, Richard?
Well, yeah, just briefly, it's over to Amy, who I think a lot of members won't know, because Amy's joined us fairly recently, I think back in September. Previously with Natural England, now our biodiversity net gain officer. So obviously we've provided a fairly detailed report, and then Amy's going to take you through a presentation that will hopefully trigger some interest and discussion.
Yeah, not half. Good evening, Amy. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
I'm keen to see this presentation, so over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction, Richard. You spoilt mine. I was going to say you probably won't know me because I was a recent addition to Calderdale. I'm just going to share my screen. 1 second. Go. So forgive me. I'm used to using Teams more than Zoom, so hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to give an update on biodiversity net gain, the new legislation that's coming in, and what we've been doing in Calderdale about that. So you will have already received the Scrutiny report, kind of outlining the background to the legislation, the sort of impacts that it's going to have on the planning system, and what Calderdale have been doing to kind of respond to those changes. But today I'm just going to go through a few slides on sort of what's the bigger picture behind biodiversity net gain, how, what and when it's going to happen. I'm going to run through a quick example of how offsetting biodiversity works on a planning application, and then quickly touch on some of the opportunities and challenges associated with biodiversity net gain. So recently there's been sort of a wealth of environmental strategies, policies and legislations released. One of the most significant ones was the government's 25-year environment plan, which was released in 2018, and that had some really ambitious targets to improve our natural environment. And then this year they set some really specific goals and means to meet those targets in the environmental improvement plan. And in reality, a lot of these goals lead to an environment with thriving plants and wildlife, and this is kind of the ultimate indicator that we've been successful and started to reverse nature's decline. And also these national sort of policies and strategies have been reflected by Calderdale in our declaration of a climate and ecological emergency. So why is it important that biodiversity is thriving? Well, not only does it kind of have a value to wildlife and the environment and the planet, it also has a significant value to people as well, providing sort of environmental benefits like flood alleviation, climate regulation, air and water quality, health and well-being, food production, and also the beauty of the local area's character, which is obviously a really distinctive feature of Calderdale. So there's been this recognition that development and built infrastructure has kind of been one of the major causes for the declines in nature, losing valuable habitats and fragmenting ecological connectivity. And this means that species and habitats are less resilient to those other pressures, such as climate change. So biodiversity net gain has been introduced as part of the new Environment Act, and it's a core element to meet our goals to restore nature and kind of moves development away from this balancing act of built infrastructure versus ecology to actively pursuing better outcomes for biodiversity through development. So what is biodiversity net gain? Well, briefly, it's the concept of leaving land measurably better for biodiversity than it was before. And while these kind of general principles of no net loss and biodiversity offsetting have been around for some time, and the National Planning Policy Framework requires a measurable net gain, we've not actually had a clear way to quantify this until now. So from January next year, under the new legislation, a 10% measurable net gain in biodiversity will be mandated after land has been developed. And this is a big shift in policy, creates a more standardized process, and it actually has a framework and tools to support it. So it will need to be measured using DEFRA's biodiversity metric, which gives habitats a numerical value based on their sort of value to biodiversity. And any habitats that are created in order to get this 10% measurable net gain will also need to be legally secured and remain in place for a minimum of 30 years. And that's really to allow habitats to mature and provide long-term benefits to wildlife and the environment. So there's three possible delivery routes for biodiversity net gain. The first being on-site, which is the option that we would prefer developers to go to first. And that's looking to get their 10% net gain on site within the red line boundaries. So that might be through a combination of habitat enhancement, enhancing ones that they've already sort of retained that are valuable, or habitat creation, much of which could be things like green infrastructure, new suds and swales, new open space, and that kind of thing. But obviously that's not always going to be appropriate or possible on a development site. Especially in Calderdale, we have a lot of sites that are very constrained, they're quite small. If they already have a lot of good quality habitat on there already, they can't really enhance that further. So in those cases, they'll be able to go off-site and start looking at land managers that own land in the local area, and they can fund those land managers to manage their land better for biodiversity in order to achieve that 10% net gain. And finally, there is a last option, which is a last resort, which is statutory credits. This will be set up by the Secretary of State. And if developers can't get their 10% on site, they can't find any local providers in order to offset their biodiversity locally, they'll be able to purchase credits from the Secretary of State, and that'll go on to fund strategic projects nationally for habitat enhancement and creation. But that is a last resort because obviously we want to keep we want to get biodiversity put in place as close to the impact as possible, rather than at a national scale. So I'm going to just quickly walk through an application from Calderdale. This was quite an early case from 2019, so it's not exactly perfect, and I didn't personally work on this project, so I don't know all of the nitty-gritty of it, but it's a good example of how biodiversity offsetting actually works in practice. So this was for the construction of 267 dwellings in Brighouse. So what you can see is basically a map of the habitats that were in existence before the development took place, and that's on your left. So what developers are required to do is get an ecological consultant to come in and assess the existing baseline of the site, so the kind of habitats that are in place, the condition that they're in, and that all gets fed into a metric, which is it is an Excel sheet. Essentially, you put all these details in, and it will tell you the numerical value of each of these habitat parcels as biodiversity units. So it is important to note that this is just based on habitats, and all other environmental policies still apply. So you need to factor in things like protected species and sites, and developers also need to apply the mitigation hierarchy. As this was an early example, they haven't applied this perfectly. So this is the concept of avoiding impacts to high value habitats where possible in the first instance, mitigating these where impacts aren't avoidable, and then compensating for losses in the final case. But they have managed to include a lot of areas of open space. They've retained some of the tree cover and some of the corridors in the design, but you can tell that they haven't factored in biodiversity net gain early enough in this case. And that's something that developers have got better at over the years, and are factoring into their designs early on now. So this slide just shows a snippet of the kind of overall results from the biodiversity metric that they've completed. We'll expect developers to submit their full metric calculations so that we as planning officers and ecologists can scrutinise those as part of the planning process. They'll also have to provide a full biodiversity net gain report outlining how they followed all the rules and principles to achieve a 10% net gain, and how they've kind of assessed the habitats, how they've justified the condition that they're in and the type of habitat that they've allocated to them, and also that the post-development habitats that they're proposing are actually feasible and achievable on that site. So you can just see from this kind of spreadsheet that you've got the on-site baseline values. So that was what was there pre-intervention, the on-site post-intervention value. So that's what will be there after the site is developed. And because this site couldn't meet a 10% net gain on site, it was considered acceptable to then go and achieve this off site. And overall, they've managed to achieve an 11.28% net gain in habitat units and an 150% net gain in hedgerow units post development. And that was by doing this off site at Norland Moor, which was selected in order to achieve the 10% net gain. So when selecting an offsite, we kind of take various aspects into consideration. So how close it is to the development, the further away you place your offsite units, the higher you're kind of penalised for doing so. And that really incentivizes close delivery to the development site to benefit wildlife and the local community. You also have to think about whether the habitats match those which are being lost from the development site. And a council consideration is perhaps whether the offsetting site can benefit people and communities as well. So is there public access and that kind of side of things. So Norland was considered to meet all of these criteria, and a similar process to the development sites then undertaken. You undertake a baseline survey, an ecologist undertakes a baseline survey of the existing habitats, and that's this map that you can see here. And they identify all of the habitats that are present and their current condition. And we can then use that information to identify areas where an improvement could be made to the site. So this slide here kind of shows those same habitats in terms of their condition. So the red is where habitats are in poor condition, the amber is where they're in sort of moderate condition, and the green is where they're already in good condition. And we can start to use this to try and think about why the habitats might not be in good condition on the site. So it might be down to things like dog fouling or dogs trampling the vegetation, erosion via footpaths or sort of footpaths impacting on drainage, Invasive species, I think on Norland it was rhododendron, but that could also be things like Japanese knotweed or Himalayan balsam that are identified. And then you can use that information to start drawing up plans on how the condition might be improved. So it might be things like restricting dogs to certain areas, rerouting paths to less sensitive areas, or kind of closing informal desire lines that have opened up in the habitat, and controlling invasive species. It's really a careful balancing act on council sites, because we need to consider the current use of the site, and any sort of large changes to the management of the site should be done in consultation with the community as well. So overall, the units for the development to achieve 10% net gain equated to 55,000, which will then be used to manage a couple of these parcels on Northern Moor better for 30 years. We'll start to fund the rest of the management plan as further off-site units are required from development. So it's not funding the entire thing right now, but that's something that can be built up over time as more development comes forward requiring off-site units. So some of the opportunities for biodiversity net gain for councils. So as the previous example shows, it's a huge opportunity for councils to look at their own land and bring it forward for different management that's beneficial for biodiversity and receive funding to do that. It also means we can kind of just deliver our strategic priorities on our own land as well. So maybe creating new habitats that control and store water, or creating multifunctional, better quality green infrastructure for communities. It's also kind of promoting that cross-organisational way of working as well. There's so many different departments that are required to work together in order for biodiversity net gain to be successful, and it creates this kind of more cohesive council with an aligned vision. We can also have the option to work with other local land owners, such as farmers, giving them advice on how to access biodiversity funding from development, and also to bring their land into better management as well for biodiversity. And that aligns with our priorities, where we might not have been in control of land, or might not have had much influence over the management of that land beforehand. But there are quite a lot of challenges associated with biodiversity net gain as well. Just to highlight a few of them here, they're also highlighted within the report that you've all had as well. But resourcing obviously is a big challenge for local planning authorities anyway. As shown in the example, we'll be receiving a lot more information during planning applications, which needs to be scrutinised by officers. We also need to keep track and monitor whether biodiversity net gain has actually been delivered on an off-site, and whether it's been maintained for 30 years. And where it's not, we may have to enforce as well. We're also going to need a lot more legal input into our applications than we would usually, to secure those off-site biodiversity sites as well. There's a lot more skills required from ecologists, planners, validation, committee members in order to make effective decisions. There's new IT and GIS skills required as well to map and monitor biodiversity net gain and kind of figure out what our strategic priorities are for the future. There's also a lack of certainty on the legislation requirements currently, as government are yet to finalise the secondary legislation and the guidance. That is due this month, but it has led to some difficulties for LPAs in sort of creating their policies and looking to secure their own land for biodiversity net gain, as we cannot legally secure it with ourselves. So this is a challenge that we're currently developing options to navigate. So finally, just to note that today's main points are to note that B&G will have a large impact on the planning process and the council's resources. We welcome feedback on the approach that Calderdale has taken so far to prepare for net gain. That members, and particularly those that are on planning committee, should prepare for further training on biodiversity net gain, which will probably be coming from myself in future. And that there's a need to invest in software to help to manage and monitor the large volumes of new information that are expected as a result of biodiversity net gain. And I will see if there's any questions.
Amy, thank you very much indeed for that. And straight off the blocks, as it appears on my screen, is Councillor Wood. Good evening.
I definitely wasn't first, but I'm happy to go first if you want. So does this affect the local plan, obviously? Because there's, adding 10% net biodiversity seems difficult given the amount of green space we're giving up with that. I've got 2 more questions after this. Do you want me to just rattle them all off? Or?
Actually, yeah. I'll tell you what. Let's do it by the person in that case, because it may mean that your questions may be anticipated by anybody else. Go on, go for it.
Next one was, I get that DEFRA set the biodiversity guidelines, like how we categorize it, but who actually measures it, and how's that monitored and scrutinized? And the third one was, why are we only complying with the government mandated amount? Can we do more? Is this as good as it gets? Do we have to only do what the government 10% is, or can we do better than that? Why can we set our own rules? I guess is what I'm asking.
Excellent questions. Yeah, who's going to come back? Is that Richard coming back?
It might be.
Yeah, shall I start with the first question about the local plan? I mean, biodiversity net gain is, what's the word? It's been sort of on the cards for quite some time. So it is something that we have taken into account in the finalisation of the local plan, and it was discussed at the local plan examination. We have been having discussions with various developers promoting local plan sites at the pre-application stage, and those negotiations have been based on the assumption that the mandatory BNG will be in place. So it is something that we've been taking into account and actively discussing with developers to what extent it can be provided on site, or whether off-site BNG needs to be provided. But of course, ultimately, you're only going to get the BNG if development comes forward. And I think that was the point that Amy made earlier in her presentation. What I might do is jump ahead to the final question and maybe leave the sort of the middle question about monitoring for Amy. So in terms of the going above and beyond the 10%, we've got to be mindful of the need for a balanced approach. Now, biodiversity net gain is mandatory. It's become a new requirement. It arguably hasn't yet sort of fully fed through into land values. So we need to be mindful that the objective of the local plan is ultimately to deliver development. We don't want to make development unviable. So if we decided that we wanted 20%, that would certainly undermine the viability of the local plan. It would mean that the sites didn't come forward, and ultimately, if the sites don't come forward, you don't get any net gain. So it's about a balanced approach. It's about also sites don't just deliver BNG. There's affordable housing, there's open space, there's transport benefits. So it's got to be it's got to be a balanced approach. You can't ultimately, it wouldn't be in the council's interest to make development unviable.
I'm not proposing double. I'm just saying, could we not do slightly better than what is absolutely mandated? Are we only doing it because somebody's telling us to? Or are we doing this because it's the right thing to do?
No, I mean, we've actually been delivering. Biodiversity net gain is not yet it's not yet been mandated. In Calderdale, we've been delivering BNG for a number of years. So the application case study that Amy referred to was an application from, I think, 2000 and 2019. So I think to some extent we've been ahead of the game.
And out of the ones we've done, then how much of it's been offset? Because obviously that was banded as the last resort.
No, the last resort is credits, where you buy these credits from the government. It's the kind of off-site is the kind of middle resort, as it were. I mean, you'll often find that there'll be some element of on-site and some element of off-site. But I don't think we should underestimate the challenge. I think delivering 10% is going to be challenging. I mean, that is 10% over and above what's there at the moment. So
which sort of brings me on to the second question of who assesses that we've actually achieved that 10%. And a lost badger set, bat habitat, whatever, can't just be replaced by a hedge, right? But does hedge count for more? Like, how is this assessed, and how do we establish that we're actually coming up with a benefit rather than just doing some clever maths and making it look like we've improved things?
Do you want me to come in there, Richard?
I guess what I'm asking is, are we doing this by the letter of the law or the spirit of the endeavour, which is making the borough a better place?
Yeah, so we will be scrutinising the applications that come in. Those will be undertaken by consultants that the developer has employed to do so. So same with any other information that it's submitting with a planning application, they go to an external consultant, an ecological consultant who's held to professional standards. They carry out the habitat surveys and fill out the metric. That then comes to myself or someone else in the biodiversity team to review that. And obviously we have the expertise to be able to go through those calculations. We'll go out to site if necessary to check that what they've done is correct. And we'll really sort of go into detail on how that habitat's been, classified as what it is. How have they come to that conclusion? Is what they're proposing actually feasible? Are they trying to put something onto the development site or the off-site that actually is never going to achieve what they're saying it's going to achieve? So we really do go into detail on whether what they're actually proposing is feasible and whether it's been done correctly. There's also a lot of sort of trading rules, which I didn't go into the full detail of how the metric works in this presentation, but I can do that at member training in future if that's something that is of interest. So it's things like, if you're losing a woodland, you wouldn't be able to just replace it with any old habitat. It'd have to be a woodland of the same caliber as the one that you're losing. And also when we're going through this, obviously I did mention that these are all based on habitats, but there are also species that use these habitats that are equally as important. So that's something else that we will look at as the biodiversity team to make sure that, okay, they might be getting a net gain, but is that impacting on the functionality of the site and the ecological functions that are there already? And is that going to have a negative impact on species, even though, on paper, it might look like they're getting a net gain? And that's something that we'll be preventing as well. And that's been outlined in the new SPD, which is currently out for consultation as well. So on the monitoring aspect as well, there's kind of a project level and a policy level element to it. So the project level obviously relates to development sites and off-sites themselves, and we'll be receiving reports back on either an annual or a 5-yearly basis, depending on what that habitat is. Again, we'll have to look at those and check that they're actually implementing what they should be. And if not, that's when perhaps we'll have to go and enforce. As the council as well, we'll also be reporting back to DEFRA on how successful we have been in getting a net gain in each application as well, and the kinds of habitats that have been lost or created in order to kind of monitor the success of biodiversity net gain as a policy. I just go on to say about the the 10% and going over and above as well. There are some councils that have set over 10% in local plans. They tend to be significantly different than Calderdale in terms of their ecology. It's a lot of sort of down south, they've got a lot of agricultural land, which is quite ecologically barren, and it can be quite easy for developers to actually achieve that over and above 10%. Calderdale, obviously quite constrained, quite a lot of nice ecology there already. It can be quite a challenge to go above it. So it'd be something we'd have to do sort of feasibility studies, as Richard said, to try and do that. But where developers are perhaps close to really valuable habitats or have potential to create connections, we'll be pushing for more than 10% anyway to try and boost that, although won't have the policy to kind of back it up at the moment.
The answer to the question is employed by the developer, but we have the power to...
Can I just come in? Dan, you've suddenly gone underwater on us.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, try again.
Better?
Yeah, it seems to be. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just that I don't want to miss your point. You're making some good points.
I was so just summarising then, it's the developer employs a consultant that decides whether they're fitting within the boundaries, and then we moderate that. We, as a council, check that, and presumably the council's got power to enforce that. There are teeth in this. There are penalties that can... Is that something that we ever do? Is that something that's happened in the past?
Well, it'd be done through planning enforcement, which Richard might be the one to speak about that.
Yes, so if it's secured through Section 106 agreements, legal agreements, then ultimately enforcement would be via an injunction, county court or high court injunction. That's the method for enforcing a legal agreement.
And is that something that we've done in the past, or have we never had anybody step outside of the agreement before?
I don't recall. I mean, we've used injunctions previously, but not in the not in the context of a legal, not in the context of a legal agreement. I mean, the thing with Section 106 agreements is that they're picked up when houses are going through the conveyancing process, and the solicitors generally inquire and ask for evidence that that they have been complied with, and that they don't allow purchases to be completed. So they are, to some degree, there's sort of an element of self enforcement, but Amy made the point about appropriate sort of software and how you actually manage the BNG process, how you can extract this information. So when someone comes along and says, demonstrate to me that this has been met, if you've got the right technology backing it up, you can easily produce that information. So it's about having the right work processes, the right sort of IT solution to back it up. But ultimately, the council could, if we weren't getting anywhere with a developer, we could get an injunction which basically says you must not, no more houses must be occupied until this has been properly addressed.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Kimber.
Thank you, and thank you, Amy. That was a really comprehensive report and a great introduction for us. My question is about future proofing and looking right into the future with this, and whether we have enough space in Calderdale to deliver these net gains going forward. You know, I'm thinking really way off into the future and thinking how we're quite small as a borough, and whether we've got the space to do all these great gains. Thank you.
If I maybe start and then pass over to, I'll do the higher level bit and then pass over to Amy. I mean, I guess we're actually geographically, as a metropolitan borough, we're quite large. We have a sort of small population, but quite a large amount of land. And Amy's actually doing some work at the moment with other council services to look at the massive amount of land that the council owns. I mean, obviously the council owns the Norland Moor and lots of sort of areas of woodland. So there are quite considerable opportunities. But Amy, do you want to just say anything about the work you're doing around sort of mapping to establish what the sort of the capacity is to deliver BNG, particularly on council owned land?
Yeah, I mean, we're still early days, and I don't have the sort of facts and figures with me to hand at the moment, but we are looking at identifying the land that the council currently owns that might be suitable to deliver biodiversity net gain on. And there's quite a considerable land holding, to be honest, that we have that's feasible to deliver that on. So at the moment, it's not a huge concern that we won't have space to offset biodiversity. And obviously, in the first instance, we're trying to make sure that developers really include a lot of that on the development site as well. So they really shouldn't be trying to offset their entire value somewhere else. A lot of that needs to be going on site through sort of open space, green infrastructure, and making those development sites an attractive and nice place to live. So that balance should really kind of combat that issue. And beyond the council land as well, we've also done quite a lot of work with Natural England and looking at farmers and other land owners in the area that are interested in using biodiversity net gain as a way to manage their land better for biodiversity as well. So that's another element. Once we've kind of mapped out our council owned land, we can start to kind of add to that as well with other interested landowners within Calderdale.
That's brilliant. Yeah, because just thinking about the landowner grant scheme and opportunities for mitigating flood risk and things, and these, that would be fantastic. On, we know we've got lots of landowners that may or may not be willing to give their land up, but yeah, it could have a sort of twofold benefit to it here in Calderdale. Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. Councillor Brundell.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Few questions, as you might expect. Firstly, just to pick up on the enforcement point, I know that across the country there's issues with both legally with planning enforcement, but also in terms of recruitment. Is there an expectation that once this fully kicks in, there would be room for more recruitment, or how will that be managed within that? I'm just aware the pressure's already on the department as across the country. I know it's not specific to Calderdale. Also, so I think it's just been touched on. I know DEFRA estimated at some point last year that 75% of BNG can be met on site, they think, across the country. Is that something that within Calderdale we're expecting, or we're seeing stuff coming through, or stuff we're expecting through planning? So I'm aware that it sounds like there's encouragement for it to be delivered on site, but it may be easier or cheaper or whatever to deliver off site for some developers. So just what mechanisms are really in place to ensure it's on site for not just the biodiversity, but also the benefits of well-being and green spaces, on health and all of that for those local people. Final question as well. Is this an opportunity for the council to do some larger projects that may otherwise be difficult? I know Norland Moor has been cited as an example, but also larger, woodlands and forests, if we utilise that habitat banking and credits come to us in that way to do those larger projects. Is that an opportunity there for something we wouldn't otherwise be able to really deliver? I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks, Councillor.
Again, maybe if I start and then pass to Amy. So yes, I mean, the issue around resources, I think on Amy's concluding slide, that is flagged as, I think, under the heading of challenges. And we've, across West Yorkshire, we have done work we use WSP consultants to look at the resourcing. I think it's fair to say that could be a challenge. Obviously, we're very fortunate. We've got Amy in post. Amy is working very closely with the countryside team in public services. But of course, over time, this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as you get more what's the word? More biodiversity net gain agreements. So I think it's not out of the question that the need for resources will increase. Now, it is worth saying that within the units, obviously most of the money, if it's I think from memory, that is it 27, about £25,000 per unit, Amy, if that's correct, and about 20,000 is the actual habitat work. About 2,500 is actually to sort of cover the council's costs with monitoring and other activities, and I think about 2,500 is for sort of more strategic work. So to some degree, there will be a kind of resource stream coming from the BNG itself, but of course you still need the skills. No amount of money can sort of, you need people who have actually have the skills and knowledge and ability. And I've said in a few conversations with people, I think this is the biggest change to affect the planning system probably since the 1990 Town and Country Planning Act. Certainly in the sort of 26-27 years I've been working in planning, I think this is the most significant change in that time. Just jumping on to your last question about sort of bigger projects, I think the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, the council's currently doing some work to look at how it manages land and how we can manage land better. And BNG is a key opportunity in that respect. I mean, you saw the slide that Amy showed, which showed the condition of Norland Moor and actually how much of it is in poor condition. A little bit more of that is going to be in better condition as a result of BNG. So hopefully over time, if we think about this strategically, there is an opportunity to sort of join up a lot of dots. And I think it was sort of Councillor Kimber's question about the natural flood management. If you've got areas of, just to take one example, if you've got areas of poor quality degraded peat, and through BNG you can improve the quality of that peat, that has ecological benefits, but of course it also has natural flood management benefits. So I absolutely think we need to see BNG as a sort of massive, it's a challenge, but it's also a massive strategic opportunity. Then I think there was sort of the middle part.
Do you want me to on how well developers are kind of delivering on-site biodiversity net gain in Calderdale? Obviously, I've only been here for 2 months, so in my experience of so far, there are some developers that are perhaps better at it than others, and again, it's kind of on a site-by-site basis as well, dependent on what's there already. But they are definitely getting better at it as time goes on. One of the really important factors is to integrate biodiversity net gain really early on in the design process. So obviously over the past few years where BNG has kind of been evolving and it's been implemented kind of sporadically across the country, it's taken developers quite a long time to kind of catch up on how to do that. But we are seeing them now sort of getting in touch with ecologists, having conversations with us about how they should be laying out the designs of sites in order to incorporate biodiversity net gain in those. And I think over time, and now we've got the local plan in place, and those sort of policies and strategies are coming forward, they're really going to try harder to integrate those, and it's going to become better It's just a case of kind of working with them and showing them how it's done, and getting some examples of good quality sites.
Thank you. If I can just come back quickly. Yeah, I think obviously I sit on planning committee, and I think it'll be exciting to see the creative ways that this is used, and that developers are planning their sites to incorporate this. And I think I know Councillor Kimber touched on this, but hopefully where we've got sites where natural flood management would be a benefit, there's an extra incentive with this, and for farmers to diversify income streams as well, particularly with climate crisis, and hopefully it provides opportunities there as well. And yeah, just add a thank you as well, because it was a detailed presentation and responses here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brundle. Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Yes, echo Councillor Brundle's words about the presentation. It's very detailed, very interesting. Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions, really. Firstly, what you mentioned a few times in the presentation and in the papers that we have, the idea of a unit. So it'd be nice to know what counts as a unit. Is it sort of a metre of hedge, or a one plant in a hedge, or how does that work? And secondly, will this requirement for biodiversity net gain require to all developments, large and small, or is it just limited to the larger developments? Because if so, it would be really useful if we can somehow manage to get it to apply to the small developments as well. I'm just particularly thinking of the ongoing concreting over the canal side in Sowerby Bridge that seems to be happening. It's there's yet another planning permission in there at the moment, and we're losing that whole wildlife corridor to housing at the moment, which is really worrying. So how do we address that? And can it be applied retrospectively? Because that would be very interesting to see. I suspect not, but it's worth asking the question. Thank you.
Definitely.
So, all really interesting questions. Thank you. So the first one on biodiversity units. Again, this is something that I will probably go into more detail on in member training, because it does get quite technical. But essentially, they're not equal to a spatial element, really. They're more based on what the habitat is. So how rare it is. This element has all been predetermined by sort of specialists from Natural England and DEFRA and various different institutes to kind of quantify the different types of habitats and how rare they are in terms of where they are in the UK. So there's that element, the condition that they're in. So they have various different factors that mean they're either in poor condition, moderate condition, or good condition. And finally, kind of how strategically placed they are. So are they in a local wildlife habitat network? Are they just an isolated fragment in the middle of nowhere that has no connections to other habitats? And you take all of those different scores, and they get sort of multiplied together, and it spits out a biodiversity unit, essentially. So you have habitat units, which are kind of like your woodlands, grasslands, hedgerow units, which are obviously hedgerows or linear tree features, and also watercourse units. And they're all separate values. You can't mix them together. So if a site has area units, hedgerow units, and watercourse units, they're having to achieve a 10% in all of those various different things as well, not just in one. So you can't kind of swap them about. But yeah, that's certainly an aspect I can go into more detail on member training as well. The second question, I can't remember which order. The last question on development sizes. No, that was the second question. The second question on development sizes. Yes, it applies to all major development, minor development. There are a few exceptions, so things like householder applications, permitted development. If development is only impacting on less than 25 meters squared of a habitat, things like that, they'll all get excluded. But all other applications are addressed under this. So yes, we will be expecting all of them to do so. And the final question on retrospectively. So it depends what that's kind of referring to, I suppose. Retrospective application, if they come in as a retrospective planning application, they'll still have to apply it, yes. And what we can do is the legislation allows us to go back to January 30th, 2020. So if a habitat has been damaged since that date and it hasn't had approval by us in order to do so, we can take that value back to that date and say, actually, you've concreted over this, but without permission. So we're classing that habitat as what it was before, and you need to compensate for that.
We wouldn't apply it to planning permissions that have already been granted.
No, that's approved.
Can I just, before I bring in Councillor Hutchinson, can I just sort of ask for a bit of clarification? Because I noticed a comment that was made about the BNG exemption through national legislation. Is that what you were talking about? That those sort of exemptions in terms of 25 meters squared and lawful development certificates and that sort of thing. Are those the exemptions that you're primarily dealing with here, rather than large developments that somehow or other manage to get biodiversity net gain exemptions?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there would be any large development that would be exempted from it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was my concern, because I will come back to that in due course. Moving on then, in that case, Councillor Hutchinson, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for inviting me as Chair of Planning Committee. I do have several questions, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
One is that the policy framework that we're going to be using is set out in the supplementary planning document, which has got another 4 days of consultation for people to respond to, and I will be sending in a response. But as it stands at the moment, I don't find it an easy document to actually understand. I mean, given that, as Richard has said, given that we're in a country that has seen the worst depletion of nature of any country in the world, the change to biodiversity net gain assessment is a huge difference from how things have been done at the moment. And I think we do need to look at the supplementary planning document, both from the point of view of an applicant who is wanting to know how to actually put in a planning application if they're not a major developer that has lots of resource available to them, and also to planning committee members to actually be able to assess the cases, the applications that come before us, and weigh the policies set out in the supplementary planning document in coming to a decision on the applications. As it stands at the moment, it's full of acronyms. The glossary is incomplete. There are very few links to lots of documents are mentioned in it that asking people to make use of, but there are no links as to where you find those documents. And things like a flow chart and a checklist for applicants. So I think there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done on that SPD, in my humble opinion. In terms of on-site and off-site provision, there are benefits not just to biodiversity, but to humans from living in a nature-rich environment. So I would really like us to be very clear that wherever possible, the biodiversity net gain is delivered on site rather than being transferred to some remote moorland or pasture land that could do with being improved. And I would also like clarity on what happens to applications that are currently in the system. Ones that may have been, whether that's ones that may have been validated already but haven't been determined, are they going to be judged from January onwards against the policies that are now set out in the supplementary planning documents? will applications that haven't been built out need to come back to be reassessed against the new policy? And one final point, I share the concerns about the long-term resources. I mean, with the monitoring is supposed to take place one year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years points. So somebody will have to have a lot of post-it notes to say, oh, this one's due to be assessed. We haven't had a monitoring report back. What do we do? What do we do about it? And what happens, the responsibility for actually discharging these obligations 10, 20, 30 years down the line, when the houses that the developer has built have been sold on to homeowners, who will presumably then have part of the responsibility for delivering the biodiversity net gain, or the developer may well have gone out of business and no longer be around. How, this is most of the agreements that we've had through planning up till now have been delivered in a very relatively short space of time, but we're talking about 30 years of delivery. So those are some of my concerns.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. So, which name you fancy having a crack at that lot?
Shall I? I'll start with the point Councillor Hutchison makes about the document, but defer the more technical points to Amy, if that's okay. I mean, the point that Councillor Hutchison makes is being very much in our minds as the document has evolved, and a lot of the work on the drafting was, I think probably most of the work on the drafting was done before Amy joined us, and there's been quite a lot of effort between the ecologists at the various West Yorkshire councils to sort of work together on this, because obviously what we're wanting to do is to try and put a bit of a sort of united front up and not have a situation where agents are saying, well, if you go to Kirklees or Bradford, they do it differently. So we are trying to maintain a sort of single approach across West Yorkshire. Earlier iterations of the document were, what's the word, certainly much more difficult. So I think we've come some way in terms of making it a more, what's the word, a more easily digestible document.
Usable.
Yeah, part of the challenge is that you're producing one document for a wide range of audiences. So at the extreme end of it, you will have an ecologist who's doing work to support a very major planning application. At the other end of the spectrum, it might be somebody who's just sort of promoting one or two houses. Obviously, it's got to be usable by the ecologists who live and breathe this. It's got to be usable by planning officers who are more generalist. It's got to be usable by planning committee, by people objecting to planning applications. So you've got a very wide range of audiences, and we have looked at how we can have sort of worked examples and flow charts and that kind of thing to explain the process. But I think that's useful feedback that ultimately we need to sort of take back and review the document again, think about its structure, think about whether we need sort of, so any form of sort of executive summaries, or how we can, because you don't want to dilute it. By definition, it's going to be a complex document with complex information in, but it's got to be usable. So I think we'll take that away and sort of think about how we can respond to that. Amy, I think there's some more technical questions that I'll let you respond to.
Yeah, I think the first one was on planning applications that are already in the system and what will happen to those. So, as Richard's already mentioned, we have been implementing biodiversity net gain in Calderdale for quite a number of years anyway. So, a lot of those applications will be getting assessed against the biodiversity net gain policies. And we've been gradually sort of filtering in those smaller sites as we've kind of upped our capacity. And obviously I've joined to be able to start assessing those as well. So it'll already be happening now. When mandatory net gain comes in, there might be additional things that we'll have to take into consideration. Obviously, I mentioned that the secondary legislation that supports this isn't out yet. So there'll be additional factors that we'll have to take into consideration when assessing planning applications, but that will only start from applications that are submitted after January, and for the smaller sites after April. And then the final question on monitoring. Yes, absolutely. It's going to be a massive task. There's not really any way to get around that. And that's why we've kind of highlighted this need for software to be able to keep track of it. Because obviously we only have one biodiversity officer, which is me. And if my time starts to be gradually pulled at constantly looking at monitoring reports and making sure that I'm chasing everybody to get those in, that's not an effective use of time. And that's why we kind of need that software in place in order to kind of do that for us. And the final point on the 30-year timescales. So we're only generally allowing sort of developers when they're doing on-site biodiversity net gain to do that on areas of public space. So those are the areas that are going to be secured for 30 years. Obviously, we can't be expecting someone in a house to be maintaining their garden in a certain way for that period of time. It's just not feasible. So it's the public open space really on site that is key to this. And this has already generally been subjected to, you have management companies that will take on the management of that open space, and the residents will pay into that. So that's generally how it works. Obviously, this is a much longer time frame, and this is something that's been picked up by central government that they need to really sort of figure out some way of making sure that those areas are maintained long term and that companies aren't going bust and it isn't going to impact on the delivery of it. So there is some additional guidance coming out from government on how to make sure that these funds are ring fenced and provided in a safe area in order for that management to carry on and kind of combat that risk really.
So if that's all right, Chair, just ask.
Sorry, Colin, you've got a bit funny, but yeah, by all means come back. But you've gone on snorkeling as well.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happened.
That's all right. That's okay. Yep.
So the developer then of an estate wouldn't then be having to pay up front for the 30 years management or anything, because if it's then being paid for by a management company into which the homeowners are then paying annually to discharge this, the developer's getting quite a good deal then, aren't they? They've got their profit from selling off the houses, and the homeowners are saddled with paying for the biodiversity net gain.
Yeah, it depends on what's being created as well, I suppose, because they're going to have to pay for the upfront creation and getting it to a suitable condition of what they've promised that they will do. And then it'll really just be the ongoing management after it's reached that condition that the residents might be responsible for. But absolutely, this has been picked up as an issue, and government are looking into this to provide sort of guidance and clarity on how we can make sure that that's avoidable, because we don't want the situation where residents are paying for an area of scrub that's really unusable to them, and 15-20 years down the line they don't understand why they're paying for the maintenance of that habitat when they can't use anything on it. They can't use it for letting the kids play on or things like that, and then it might end up degrading that habitat because they want to change it into something else. We need to make sure that it's all sort of tied up in a really comprehensive management plan, and that's fully funded and outlined how that's going to work. But yes, that is something that we're kind of waiting for further clarity on, how we work that into legislation.
Thanks, Amy.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Ahmed, good evening.
Good evening. I've just got a bit of a quick question, actually. So, we've got a policy called the Green and Healthy Streets, which is about, placemaking, active travel, and more. Have we used this effectively through planning? And if not, how can we use it, now, if not later, to essentially just reach our net diversity goals?
I think the green and healthy streets policy is something that's complementary but ultimately separate to biodiversity net gain. I think, as I understand it, some works commencing at the moment just to sort of look at the implementation of that. But obviously, that's that policy is very much about how you design streets and footpaths and cycleways, and there are opportunities through the green and healthy streets to deliver biodiversity through tree planting or through the sort of choice of landscaping, but I don't think that would contribute to the sort of very specific delivery of BNG as such. Would you agree, Amy?
Yeah, I think it is complementary, and BNG does promote things like including street tree planting. Like you can put each individual tree in that you are planting on your development, and that really is beneficial to the on-site biodiversity score that you get. It also works really well with green infrastructure and the concept of urban greening, which is this kind of making sure that you've got a certain ratio of green space on a development site, and that really helps to get the on-site biodiversity net gain score higher as well. So all of these different policies are really complementary to each other, and obviously by including them, you're obviously going to get a better biodiversity net gain score on your site. But obviously the actual biodiversity net gain itself is very focused on habitats for wildlife and the quality of them. So it's just making sure that those are all taken into consideration together to get the best possible outcome, I suppose.
So if through implementation of the green and healthy streets, you took the decision to retain a row of trees or retain a hedgerow, that would mean that you don't have to provide as much. You're losing less biodiversity, so it reduces the need to compensate for loss of biodiversity. I think that's right, Amy. So it creates BNG, I think, creates a positive incentive for developers to look at how they design imaginatively, because there's an interest in them doing so.
Yeah, and things like rain gardens as well, and swales. You might previously have just got sort of an ornamental bush or something like that, which really isn't promoting biodiversity, but might look attractive from a street scene perspective. But now we're getting, creative designs, as Richard says, to create sort of rain gardens with native species that are having a flood alleviation benefit, but also look attractive and also make that sort of green street a better place to be on as well. So it's kind of drawing all the themes together rather than all being sort of bitty and piecemeal.
I hope that answers your question, Councillor Ahmed.
Yeah, just to thank you to sort of Amy and Richard. Sort of you've completely put my question to bed there. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Right, my turn. I've got quite a few problems with BNG, mostly to do with its implementation as a principle. Absolutely, yeah, I'm on board with it. Now, in the way that we've had carbon offsetting being used by companies to do their greenwashing, my big concern is that it's going to be the same sort of thing with biodiversity net gain, where there's going to be opportunities because of under-resourcing in councils and generally about with things like simple things like double counting, but using a couple of case studies, if I may, to sort of highlight what my concerns, having been down to the Red Row Homes presentation for what is phase 1 of the Woodhouse Garden suburb, the garden neighbourhood, initially of 280 homes, if I remember correctly, something of that order. Part of their biodiversity net gain is going to be factored into people's front gardens, which took me by surprise, because on the adage that an Englishman's home is his castle, and they can do what they like with their front and back gardens, that already puts that 10% under threat. They also said that their introductory, the initial phase 1, the BNG being factored in would be as part of the overall development of the site, which may, of course, therefore mean off-site BNG being implemented in order to get to that 10% amount on what is going to be not inconsiderable a site over the distance, which then kind of leads me on to the likes of the example that Amy used, the Delph Hill development, which I'm fairly familiar with, especially with a consequence of recent rain causing localized flooding nearby. That green space that was factored in what used to be the cricket pitch at Badger Hill there is being left open as green space for the biodiversity net gain. But it would seem, if it's only 30 years, that's the lifetime of this local plan, the lifetime of the next local plan, and then it's back up in the air again for a potential local plan from about 2050-ish, if my calculations are correct, where that land could be available for development again, especially if on that particular development itself, of those 267 homes, but a large factor of them are supposed to be meant to be affordable housing, and so that for those people then to be asked to contribute to the maintenance of biodiversity net gain. And the whole point about affordable housing is that these people haven't got a lot of spare coin available. They're probably going to be more than happy to support the development of further housing on that particular site. It means that they don't have to pay for that the BNG. Then where's that BNG going to be passed on further down the line elsewhere in an increasingly less more built up landscape? Now, embedded in that rant, I'm sure there are a couple of questions which you might be able to tease out. So these are the concerns where I'm going with this, and this is partly reflected in Dan's comments, Councillor Wood's comments a bit earlier on as well, and also Councillor Hutchinson and his concerns. So I'm partly reiterating. But how does it look like from 30 years from now in that regard? I mean, that land could well become available again, and how do we pass on or augment that biodiversity net gain again going further forward in, as I say, a decreasingly available landscape? And the greenwashing. Okay, over to you, if you may. Good luck.
If you want me to come in first, Richard. On the front gardens, yes, they can count that as biodiversity net gain, but it has an extremely low value in the metric to kind of recognise that obviously people are going to change the use of their gardens. They might put decking on there, they might change it into a driveway. So it really doesn't score very highly at all in terms of BNG. So I wouldn't have thought that they would be getting a great deal of their on-site biodiversity net gain through that. But it is also important to recognise that gardens can be good for biodiversity. We've had massive declines in hedgehogs over previous years, and they really rely on that kind of connectivity of garden space being provided. So if we don't take into consideration that developers might use gardens as a minimal part of BNG, they might start reducing gardens and not providing those, and that could be detrimental as well to certain species and for local people actually appreciating nature and having access to it close to their homes. So it's really a balancing act with that one. But it is a very low score in the metric, so they won't be able to kind of use all of that for their on-site biodiversity net gain. In terms of the 30 years, yes, this is a factor that's been picked up by central government, that what happens after 30 years. In the spirit of biodiversity net gain, what you would hope to see would be that habitats have been enhanced to a really nice condition that they've said they're going to enhance them to, and they've become valuable in their own right. So they'd be assessed against local policies if they ever came up for development again. And you'd be recognising that actually they've got a really high value. It's very unlikely to be attractive for a development site, and we'd actually want them to go on to tie that land up again for another 30 years to enhance further. That's the incentive, is that you can keep using the same land and enhancing it up to its sort of maximum that it can be, using funding through development. So that's really the way that we would like to promote that. And I think it's unlikely that any land that's been used for biodiversity net gain would be attractive as a development site, because it's going to hold its own ecological value, and hopefully be a really nice habitat. I don't know, Richard, if there's any other points you wanted to pick up on in that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, I think you've covered them, Amy. I think Councillor Hutchinson put a point in the chat about the what the draft SPD states about the Red Row, about the use of gardens for BNG. And of course, at this stage, that is simply what the developers are promoting. The council hasn't come to any kind of view on whether or not that is an acceptable solution. So when if and when that application comes in, it will be judged against the SPD.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Anybody else for any more? We are now at 8 minutes past 8, so I think people are thinking about dinner and other things. But I think we've had a healthy discussion there. I'd like to thank Amy and say welcome to the council, although it has been a couple of months already. But yeah, thank you very much indeed for coming on board and putting your head on the block. Thank you also to Richard and Sheila. It's good to see you as always, and for your input. We'll move on to the next part of the agenda, which is our work programme. Libby and Mike, thank you.
I think it's me, yeah. Thank you, Chair. I will keep it brief because I am aware of the time. So just worth mentioning, we're not meeting now until the new year. So it's the 4th of January. It's the next meeting where we've got an update on the year of culture and the highways item that was previously delayed from a couple of months back, I think it was now. Also, I promise I'll keep it brief, can just give a really quick update on the 2 detailed reviews we've got going on that are reporting into this board. So the housing review, thanks to Councillor Brundell, who has volunteered to sort of take a temporary lead on this whilst Councillor Clark is away. Councillor Brundell and I and Mike met yesterday to sort of look at what we want to focus on as a part of this review. And I'm meeting with people in housing early next week to sort of start to firm up these plans. Just to say, if people, obviously it's a review that's going around the whole board, so if people have got areas they really want to focus on, please do get in touch. But the most important part of this at the moment is probably getting dates in diaries. It might seem a way off, but Mike knows my struggles of getting other dates for other scrutiny meetings. So we, between the three of us, came up with 2 possible dates, because we previously said it'd go over 2 days with a 2.5 week gap we were looking at. So we looked at the 21st of February and the 5th of March as 4 until 8 p.m. as the 2 days. I can put that in an email and send it out first thing tomorrow morning. But if people can just let me know if they've got any issues with those dates or as soon as possible, otherwise you'll probably just be getting a hold appointment middle of next week.
Okay, sorry, 21st of February.
Yeah, and the 5th of March.
Right, I'm struggling with the 21st of February and the 5th of March, as long as it's after 1 o'clock.
They're sort of late afternoon, early evening, going at 4 p.m. till 8 p.m.
Oh, wait a second, sorry. 21st.
Yes.
4 p.m.-ish would be good.
Yeah.
I can look up late on the 21st, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Well, like I said, I'll pop it in an email, and then if anybody else just wants to get in touch with any issues, if not, I'll send a hold appointment out. And then a really quick update on knife crime. By the time we've met at the next board, the detailed review group looking into knife crime, which I know there's a few people on this call that are sitting on that, will have met, and we anticipate we'll be bringing the report to the March meeting. But that, yeah, just to let members know that work is still ongoing on that. Sorry, Mike, have I missed something?
Just to remind members that we have the budget seminar looking at the first stage of the cabinet budget proposals on the 12th of December in the evening, and it'd be really good to have as big an attendance from scrutiny members as possible on that.
Yeah, I've got that in my diary, I think.
That's it.
Right, lovely. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see each other again